The ancient pines towered above us like cathedral spires, their branches intertwining to form a canopy so dense that even at noon, the forest floor remained shrouded in perpetual twilight. Marcus adjusted his backpack straps and glanced at the GPS. "We're still 2 miles from the clearing," he announced, his voice unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. I nodded, wiping sweat from my brow despite the cool air. Something felt wrong about this place. The deeper we ventured into Blackwood Forest, the more unnatural it became. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, as if the forest itself was absorbing sound. "This place gives me the creeps," Sarah whispered, staying close to her boyfriend Jake. They'd been dating for 3 months, and this camping trip was supposed to be a fun group bonding experience. For college friends, a weekend in the wilderness, what could go wrong? Jake laughed nervously. "It's just quiet. City kids like us aren't used to real nature." But I knew better. I'd grown up camping with my grandfather, and forests weren't supposed to be this silent. Where were the squirrels? The woodpeckers? Even the wind seemed afraid to rustle the branches above us. The trail narrowed, forcing us to walk single file. Marcus led, followed by Jake, then Sarah, with me bringing up the rear. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced something was following us. The feeling intensified as afternoon faded toward evening. "There!" Marcus called out. Through the trees ahead, I glimpsed open sky. The clearing. We emerged into a roughly circular space about 50 feet across, ringed by those impossibly tall pines. The grass was thick and green, almost luminescent in the fading light. It should have felt welcoming after hours in the claustrophobic forest, but instead, it felt like stepping into a trap. "Perfect spot," Jake said, dropping his pack. "We can set up camp here and have a fire in the center." As we unpacked our tents, I noticed something odd. The trees surrounding the clearing were scarred, deep gouges in the bark about 8 feet off the ground. The marks looked fresh, sap still weeping from the wounds. They formed a pattern around the entire perimeter, as if something had systematically marked its territory. "Hey, look at this," I called to the others, pointing at the nearest tree. Marcus examined the gouges, running his fingers along the deep furrows. "Probably a bear. Black bears are common in these mountains. Bears don't climb that high to mark trees," I argued. "And look at the spacing. These are too far apart for bear claws." Sarah shivered. "Can we just set up camp? I want to get the fire going before dark." We worked quickly, assembling our tents in a rough square around where the fire would be. The sun was setting rapidly, the forest growing darker by the minute. By the time we had everything ready, night had fallen like a suffocating blanket. The fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows that made the surrounding trees appear to move. We huddled around the flames, cooking hot dogs and trying to maintain normal conversation. But the silence beyond our small circle was oppressive, broken only by the occasional pop of burning wood. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah asked suddenly. We all froze, listening. In the distance, barely audible above the fire's crackling, came a sound like wind through leaves. But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. "Just the trees settling," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. The sound came again, closer this time. It almost sounded like whispering. Multiple voices, just at the edge of perception, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. Jake forced a laugh. "You're all being paranoid. It's probably just." The whispering stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute, as if the forest was holding its breath. Even the fire seemed to burn more quietly. Then we heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling our camp just beyond the reach of the firelight. The sound of something large moving through the underbrush, staying just out of sight. We all turned to face the darkness, straining to see what was out there. "Hello?" Marcus called out. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, nothing. Then, from directly behind us, came a sound that made my blood freeze, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from no earthly throat. We spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the dark wall of trees and the dancing shadows cast by our fire. "We need to leave," I whispered. "Now." "Don't be ridiculous," Jake said, but his voice was shaking. "It's just an animal. The fire will keep it away." As if in response to his words, the fire suddenly dimmed, the flames shrinking to barely a foot high. The darkness pressed in around us, and in that darkness, shapes began to move. Tall, impossibly thin figures, gliding between the trees with inhuman grace. "Do you see them?" Sarah whispered, grabbing Jake's arm. We all saw them. 7 figures, maybe 8, moving in a slow circle around our camp. They stayed just at the edge of visibility, their features obscured by shadow. But their eyes gleamed with a cold, hungry light. The whispering started again, but now I could tell it was coming from the figures. They were speaking to each other, their voices like dry leaves scraping against stone. And somehow, impossibly, I began to understand fragments of what they were saying. Fresh meat. Young blood. The harvest. I grabbed my backpack. "We're leaving. Right now." "We can't," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "Look." I turned to where he was pointing. The entrance to the clearing, the trail we'd used to get here, was gone. Where it had been, there was only an impenetrable wall of thorny undergrowth, as if it had never existed. "That's impossible," Jake stammered. The trail was right there. The figures in the darkness began to laugh, a sound like wind through a graveyard. They started moving closer, their forms becoming clearer in the dying firelight. They were human-shaped but wrong, stretched and distorted like reflections in a funhouse mirror. Their skin was pale as moonlight, their limbs too long, their fingers ending in curved claws. "The fire," I gasped. "Keep the fire going." We frantically fed more wood to the flames, but it was as if the fire itself was being drained. No matter how much fuel we added, the flames continued to shrink. One of the creatures stepped into the light, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. It had once been human, perhaps centuries ago. But now it was something else entirely, skin stretched tight over jutting bones, eyes that were pools of black emptiness, and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. "Welcome," it spoke, its voice like the whisper of wind through dead leaves. "We have been waiting so long for visitors." Sarah screamed. Jake threw a burning branch at the creature, but it passed right through as if it were made of smoke. The thing laughed again, a sound that made my teeth ache. "You cannot leave," it continued. "This is our place. Our hunting ground. And you are our prey." The other creatures began to close in. I could see now that they were all different, some tall and skeletal, others hunched and twisted, all bearing the mark of something that had once been human but had been transformed into something monstrous. The trees, I realized suddenly. The markings on the trees. They're not bare claws. They're from these things. The lead creature smiled, revealing rows of rotting teeth. "Clever. Yes, we marked our territory long ago. No one leaves our forest. No one ever leaves." As if to prove its point, the ground beneath our feet began to change. The grass withered and died, replaced by a carpet of bones, human bones, picked clean and bleached white. Skulls grinned up at us from the earth, and I realized with horror that we were standing in a massive grave. "How many?" I whispered. "Hundreds," the creature replied. "Campers, hikers, hunters. All who ventured too deep into our domain. Their bones join the soil, their spirits join our ranks." The fire finally died, plunging us into absolute darkness. But somehow, I could still see the creatures clearly, as if they were lit by their own unholy radiance. They surrounded us now, reaching out with their clawed hands. Run, I shouted. We scattered, each of us fleeing in a different direction. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. Behind me, I could hear Sarah screaming, Jake shouting, Marcus cursing. The creatures followed, their inhuman laughter echoing through the forest. I stumbled and fell, rolling down a steep embankment. When I finally stopped, I was alone in a small ravine, the sounds of pursuit fading in the distance. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. The screen showed only static. For hours, I wandered through the forest, trying to find my way out. But every path I took led back to the same place, the clearing, with its circle of marked trees and carpet of bones. The creatures were waiting for me, along with my friends. Marcus hung suspended between two trees, his body twisted at impossible angles. Sarah was on her knees, her eyes staring sightlessly ahead as one of the creatures whispered in her ear. Jake was simply gone, nothing left but his torn backpack and a spreading pool of blood. Your turn, the lead creature said, turning to me. Join us willingly, and the transformation will be quick. Fight, and we will make it last forever. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The circle of trees had closed in, trapping me in the center of the clearing. The creatures advanced, their claws extended, their mouths open in anticipation. As they reached for me, I closed my eyes and waited for the end. I opened them to find myself sitting by a dying campfire, my friends' concerned faces looking down at me. You were screaming, Sarah said. Bad dream? I looked around. We were in the clearing, but it was different now. The trees were normal, unmarked. The ground was covered in grass, not bones. Morning light filtered through the canopy above. Just a nightmare, I said, but even as I spoke, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the tree nearest to me, barely visible in the early morning light, were fresh scratches in the bark. 8 feet up, spaced too far apart for human hands. And in the distance, just at the edge of hearing, I could swear I heard the sound of whispering. The GPS died first. Emma stared at the blank screen of her phone, tapping it frantically as if that would somehow resurrect the device. This can't be right. We had full bars an hour ago. Mine's dead too, David said, pulling his phone from his pocket. The screen was cracked, spider-webbed with black lines that definitely hadn't been there that morning. What the hell? I checked my own device. Black screen. Dead battery, even though I'd charged it to 100% before we left. Rachel's phone was the same, completely lifeless, as if something had simply drained every electronic device we carried. We'll be fine, I said, trying to sound confident. The trail is clearly marked. We just follow it back to the parking lot tomorrow. But even as I spoke, I noticed something disturbing. The orange trail markers that had been nailed to trees every 50 feet were gone. Not fallen off, gone. As if they'd never existed. The 4 of us had been hiking for 3 hours into the Adirondack wilderness, looking for the perfect camping spot. We'd found it, or so we thought, a small clearing beside a crystal-clear stream, surrounded by towering hemlocks. The kind of place that would make perfect Instagram photos, if our phones weren't mysteriously dead. Look, there's still daylight, Rachel said, ever the optimist. Let's just set up camp and worry about navigation tomorrow. We unpacked our gear, but something felt wrong from the start. The forest around us was too quiet. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the stream seemed to flow more quietly than it should. As we assembled our tents, I noticed something odd about the trees. Many of them had strange symbols carved into their bark, not the usual initials or crude graffiti you'd expect from teenage campers. These were different. Older. The cuts were deep and weathered, as if they'd been there for decades. Hey, check this out, I called to David, pointing at the nearest hemlock. The symbol was about 3 feet off the ground, carved deep into the bark. It looked like a twisted tree, but with what appeared to be human figures hanging from its branches. The carving was so detailed, so precise, that it must have taken hours to complete. Probably some old logging symbols, David said, but his voice carried no conviction. Or maybe Native American markings. I knew enough about both to recognize that this was neither. These symbols felt wrong. Malevolent. Like warnings. We found them on every tree surrounding the clearing. Dozens of them, forming a complete circle around our campsite. Each one was slightly different, but all depicted the same theme: trees, humans, and something that looked uncomfortably like feeding. "We should leave," I said. "Something's not right here." "Don't be ridiculous," Rachel laughed. "They're just old carvings. Probably some artist's project from years ago." But as the sun began to set, her laughter became forced. The oppressive silence of the forest was getting to all of us. We built a fire more for comfort than warmth, huddling around the flames as darkness crept in. That's when we heard the first sound. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but it came from beneath us. The ground actually vibrated, causing ripples in our coffee cups. We all felt it, a deep, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. "What was that?" Emma whispered. Before anyone could answer, the sound came again. Closer this time. And with it came a smell, sweet and rotten, like overripe fruit mixed with decay. "Guys," David said, his voice tight with fear, "look at the trees." We turned to follow his gaze. The hemlocks surrounding our clearing were moving. Not swaying in the wind, there was no wind. They were writhing, their branches reaching toward us like grasping fingers. "That's impossible," Rachel breathed. The symbols on the trees began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The carved figures seemed to move, writhing in their wooden prison. And then, impossibly, they began to emerge from the bark. They were humanoid but wrong, stretched and distorted, their limbs too long, their faces blank except for gaping mouths filled with rows of wooden teeth. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions, like marionettes controlled by a drunk puppeteer. "The fire," I shouted. "Stay near the fire." We grabbed burning branches, waving them at the approaching figures. They recoiled from the flames, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they began to circle us, just beyond the reach of our makeshift torches. The rumbling beneath us intensified. Cracks appeared in the earth around our campsite, and through those cracks, I could see something vast and dark moving below. Root systems, but massive beyond anything that should exist. They pulsed with the same rhythm as the rumbling, like a gigantic heartbeat. "The whole forest," Emma gasped. "It's alive. It's all one organism." She was right. The trees weren't individual plants, they were extensions of something much larger. Something that had been here long before humans walked these mountains. Something that had learned to mimic the forest while feeding on anything that entered its domain. The wooden figures pressed closer, their mouths opening wider. I could see down their throats, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Instead of flesh and bone, their insides were hollow, lined with what looked like bark. They were just extensions of the trees, hollow vessels for something much more sinister. "We need to get out of here," I said, but even as I spoke, I realized the horrible truth. The stream we'd been following was gone. The trail we'd hiked in on had vanished. We were surrounded by an endless forest of reaching branches and hungry mouths. One of the creatures lunged at Rachel. She screamed and swung her burning branch, but it passed right through the thing as if it were made of smoke. The creature's wooden fingers closed around her arm, and I watched in horror as her skin began to change. Bark patterns spread up from where it touched her, woody growths erupting from her flesh. "It's trying to absorb her," David yelled. He grabbed a larger branch from the fire and thrust it at the creature's face. This time, the flame had an effect, the thing shrieked and released Rachel, but not before the bark-like infection had spread up her entire arm. Rachel looked down at her transformed limb in shock. Her fingers had become thin branches, her skin rough and brown. "I can feel it," she whispered. "The hunger. The need to feed." The creatures pressed closer, and I realized they weren't trying to kill us, they were trying to transform us. To make us part of the forest, part of whatever ancient thing lurked beneath the soil. The fire was dying. No matter how much wood we fed it, the flames grew smaller and smaller. The creatures sensed our weakness and began to advance in earnest. Emma screamed as one of them grabbed her leg. The transformation began immediately, her skin splitting and reforming into bark, her bones lengthening and twisting into branch-like shapes. She tried to fight it, but I could see the hunger growing in her eyes, the human consciousness being overwhelmed by something alien and ravenous. "Run!" I shouted to David, but there was nowhere to go. The trees had closed in around us, their branches forming an impenetrable wall. We were trapped in a small circle of dying firelight, watching our friends transform into something monstrous. David grabbed my arm. "The symbols," he said urgently. "They're not just decorations. They're instructions. Look." I followed his gaze to the nearest tree. The carving was moving, showing us what was happening, how the forest fed, how it transformed its prey into extensions of itself. But there, at the bottom of the symbol, was something else. A small figure, running. An escape route. "We have to go down," David said. "Into the root system. There has to be a way out." It was insane, but what choice did we have? The creatures were closing in, and our transformed friends were beginning to turn toward us with hungry, empty eyes. We dove through one of the cracks in the earth, sliding down into the vast network of roots below. The smell of decay was overwhelming, and the pulsing heartbeat of the forest entity was deafening. But we pressed on, following the tunnel-like passages between the massive roots. Behind us, I could hear the creatures pursuing, their wooden feet scraping against the root walls. But they moved slower down here, as if the effort of maintaining their forms was draining the forest's energy. We ran for what felt like hours, through a maze of organic tunnels that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Finally, we saw light ahead, real sunlight, not the sickly glow of the symbols. We emerged from a cave opening miles from where we'd started, gasping and covered in dirt and organic matter. The forest around us looked normal, birds singing, insects buzzing, the natural sounds we'd been missing. But when we turned back to look at the cave entrance, it was gone. Just solid rock, as if it had never existed. We stumbled through the woods for hours before finding a road. A park ranger found us there, dehydrated and babbling about living trees and wooden monsters. He took us to the hospital, where doctors treated us for exhaustion and exposure. Nobody believed our story. Why would they? 2 college students, claiming their friends had been transformed into trees by a carnivorous forest. The official report listed Emma and Rachel as missing, presumed lost in the wilderness. But I know the truth. Sometimes, when I'm driving through forested areas, I see them. Standing just inside the tree line, their bark-covered faces turned toward the road. Watching. Waiting. And I know that somewhere in the Adirondacks, there's a clearing where the trees grow thick and the symbols glow at night. A place where the forest itself has learned to hunt, and where 2 young women stand eternal guard, forever hungry for the next group of campers who might wander too far from the marked trails. The Park Service has sealed off that section of the forest now, citing unstable ground conditions. But I know better. They know what's out there. They're just hoping it stays contained. I hope they're right. Because sometimes, late at night, I can still feel the bark growing under my skin, and I wonder if I really escaped at all, or if I'm just another part of the forest's plan, luring fresh prey to its hungry embrace. The rental car's engine died with a final, wheezing cough just as we reached the trailhead. Steam billowed from under the hood, carrying the acrid smell of burning oil and antifreeze. "Perfect," muttered Alex, slamming his fist against the steering wheel. "Just perfect." I climbed out and popped the hood, though I already knew what I'd find. The radiator had burst, leaving a puddle of green fluid spreading across the gravel. We were stranded, 40 miles from the nearest town, with no cell service and a weekend camping trip planned. "What now?" asked Jessica, shouldering her backpack. She was trying to hide her anxiety behind a forced smile, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "We hike in anyway," said Tom, our self-appointed group leader. "The campsite's only 3 miles up the trail. We'll deal with the car when we get back." The Pine Ridge Trail was well maintained, winding through dense stands of Douglas fir and hemlock. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a pleasant hike. But something felt off from the moment we entered the tree line. The forest was too orderly. Too perfect. The trees stood in unnaturally straight rows, their branches pruned to identical heights. No fallen logs cluttered the forest floor. No undergrowth crowded the spaces between trunks. It looked more like a vast outdoor cathedral than a wild forest. "Weird," Jessica murmured, echoing my thoughts. "It's like someone's been maintaining this place." "Maybe the Park Service," Alex suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. We all knew this wasn't normal forest management. As we climbed higher, the trees grew larger and more uniform. Their bark was smooth and pale, almost luminescent in the filtered sunlight. And carved into each trunk, at exactly eye level, was a symbol I didn't recognize, a circle with 3 lines radiating from the center, like a simplified sun. "Those aren't natural," Tom said, running his finger along one of the carvings. "Someone's been marking these trees." "But why?" Jessica asked. I had no answer. The symbols were everywhere, on every tree we passed. They were carved deep, the cuts clean and precise. But there was something unsettling about them, something that made my skin crawl. We reached the designated campsite as the sun was setting. It was a circular clearing about 50 feet across, surrounded by the same unnaturally uniform trees. A stone fire pit sat in the center, its rocks blackened by countless previous fires. Everything was clean, orderly, waiting. "This is too convenient," I said. "Look around. No trash, no signs of previous campers. It's like someone prepared this place specifically for us." "You're being paranoid," Tom said, dropping his pack. "Let's just be grateful we found a good spot." We set up our tents in the gathering dusk, working by flashlight as the forest around us grew dark. The silence was absolute, no wind, no animal sounds, not even the rustle of leaves. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. The fire caught easily, burning with an unnaturally steady flame. We cooked our dinner and tried to maintain normal conversation, but the oppressive quiet made every word feel forced. "Did you guys notice," Alex said quietly, "we haven't seen a single animal all day? No birds, no squirrels, nothing." He was right. The forest was completely devoid of life except for the trees themselves. Even the insects were absent, no mosquitoes, no gnats, nothing. "Maybe it's the elevation," Jessica suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. As we sat around the fire, I became aware of a strange sensation. The feeling of being watched. Not by animals, by something else. Something patient and calculating. I looked up at the trees surrounding our camp. In the flickering firelight, they seemed to lean inward, as if listening to our conversation. And those symbols carved into their bark seemed to pulse with their own faint light. "Tom," I said quietly, "look at the trees." He followed my gaze and went pale. The symbols were definitely glowing now, a soft blue-white light that grew stronger as the fire died down. And in that light, I could see something else, shapes moving behind the trunks, tall and thin, keeping just out of sight. "What the hell is that?" Alex whispered. The shapes were humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. They moved with a fluid grace that was distinctly non-human, gliding between the trees without making a sound. "Everyone stay calm," Tom said, but his voice was shaking. "They're probably just other campers." But even as he spoke, we all knew that wasn't true. These weren't human figures moving in the darkness. They were something else entirely. The fire suddenly flared, sending sparks high into the air. In the bright light, I caught a clear glimpse of one of the creatures. It was standing just at the edge of the clearing, motionless as a statue. It had once been human, I realized with horror. The basic shape was there: head, torso, arms, legs. But everything was stretched and distorted, as if someone had pulled a person through a funnel. Its skin was bark-like, rough and ridged. Its eyes were empty sockets that seemed to drink in the light. And carved into its forehead was the same symbol we'd seen on the trees. "Oh God," Jessica whimpered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." The creature tilted its head, studying us with those empty eye sockets. Then it opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and spoke in a voice like wine through dead leaves. "Welcome," it said. "We have been waiting for you." More figures emerged from between the trees. Dozens of them, all bearing the same stretched, distorted appearance. They formed a circle around our campsite, just beyond the reach of the firelight. "You are the chosen ones," the first creature continued. "Selected for the great purpose. The forest has need of you. What do you want?" Tom demanded, trying to sound brave. "To serve," the creature replied. "To become part of the eternal watch. To join us in our vigil." I noticed something horrifying about the creature's faces. Beneath the bark-like skin, I could see traces of human features. A nose here, a lip there. These things had once been people. Campers, hikers, visitors to this cursed place who had been transformed into something monstrous. "The forest is alive," the creature explained, as if reading my thoughts. "It thinks, it feels, it plans. But it cannot move. It needs servants. Watchers. Guardians to protect it from those who would harm it." "We won't hurt anything," Alex said desperately. "We'll leave. Right now. We'll never come back." The creature's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. "Leave? But why would you want to leave? This is paradise. Perfect order. Perfect peace. No chaos, no uncertainty, no pain. No life," I said. "Life is overrated," the creature replied. "What is life but struggle and suffering? Here, you will know only purpose. Only duty. Only the eternal watch." The circle of creatures began to close in. I could see now that they weren't just standing guard, they were preparing to attack. Their fingers ended in sharp, twig-like claws. Their mouths hung open, revealing those rows of wooden teeth. "The transformation is quick," the creature assured us. "You will feel no pain. The forest is merciful to those who serve willingly. Run!" I shouted. We scattered in different directions, but the creatures were faster than they looked. I heard Jessica scream behind me as one of them caught her. When I looked back, I saw her struggling in the thing's grip, her skin already beginning to change, bark-like patterns spreading up her arms. I crashed through the underbrush, following what I hoped was the trail back to the car. But the forest had changed. The neat rows of trees were gone, replaced by a tangled maze of branches and roots. The trail had vanished. Behind me, I could hear the creatures pursuing. Their voices rose in a haunting chorus, calling my name, promising peace and eternal service. I ran harder, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I burst into a small clearing and stopped, gasping. Tom was there, backed against a tree, surrounded by 3 of the creatures. His face was already changing, the skin taking on that rough, bark-like texture. "It's not so bad," he said, his voice distorted. "They're right. No more worry, no more pain. Just purpose. Tom, fight it." I yelled, but it was too late. The transformation was complete. He stood up, his body stretched and distorted, his eyes now empty sockets. The symbol appeared on his forehead, glowing with that same blue-white light. "Join us," he said, reaching out with clawed fingers. "Join the Eternal Watch." I ran again, crashing through the forest in blind panic. Every tree looked the same, every path led nowhere. I was lost in a maze of my own making, pursued by creatures that had once been my friends. Finally, exhausted and desperate, I collapsed beside a stream. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the star-filled sky above. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe I could follow the stream out of the forest. Maybe I could escape this nightmare. That's when I saw my reflection in the water. My face was changing. Bark-like patterns spread across my cheeks, and my eyes were beginning to sink into their sockets. The transformation had already begun. I looked up to find the creatures surrounding me. Tom, Jessica, Alex, all of them transformed, all of them watching me with those empty, patient eyes. "It's time," the original creature said. "Time to take your place among the Watchers." I wanted to resist, to fight, to scream. But the change was spreading through my body, and with it came a strange sense of peace. The creature was right. No more struggle. No more pain. Just purpose. I felt my consciousness expanding, merging with something vast and ancient. The forest's thoughts became my thoughts. Its needs became my needs. I understood now why the Watchers existed, why they stood guard in this perfect, ordered place. The forest was dying. Slowly, inexorably, it was being consumed by the chaos of the outside world. Roads, buildings, pollution, all of it eating away at the natural order. But here, in this small pocket of perfection, the old ways could be preserved. And we were the guardians of that preservation. I took my place among the Watchers, standing at the edge of the clearing where future campers would make their fires. My human memories faded, replaced by the forest's ancient wisdom. I knew my purpose now. To wait. To watch. To welcome the next group of visitors who would stumble upon this perfect place. The forest was patient. It had all the time in the world. And so did we. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time had no meaning for the Watchers. We stood motionless among the trees, waiting for the next group of hikers to discover our paradise. When they finally came, 3 young men with backpacks and cameras, we were ready. They set up their camp in the same clearing, lit their fire in the same stone pit, and slowly became aware of our presence. "Welcome," I said, stepping into the firelight. "We have been waiting for you." The cycle began again. As it always had. As it always would. The forest was eternal. And now, so were we. The missing persons report was 3 months old when we found it crumpled in the ranger station's trash can. 5 kids from the local summer camp had vanished without a trace while on an overnight hiking trip. The search had been called off after 2 weeks, the case filed away as another tragic accident in the unforgiving wilderness. "Look at this," Maya whispered, smoothing out the wrinkled paper. "They were last seen heading toward Hollow Creek. That's exactly where we're going." I studied the grainy photographs of the missing children. All between 8 and 12 years old, all smiling happily at the camera in their matching camp t-shirts. The article mentioned strange sounds heard in the forest that night, but the details were vague. "So what?" scoffed Derek, our group skeptic. "Kids get lost in the woods all the time. It's tragic, but it has nothing to do with us." But something about those innocent faces bothered me. The way their eyes seemed to follow me as I looked at the photos. The way their smiles appeared forced, as if they were hiding something. We were a documentary crew investigating urban legends and local folklore. Maya handled the camera, Derek managed sound, and I served as researcher and narrator. Hollow Creek had been mentioned in several online forums as a place where weird things happened, but we'd found nothing concrete until now. The trail to Hollow Creek wound through dense second-growth forest, the path barely visible beneath fallen leaves and encroaching undergrowth. It was clear that few people ventured this far into the wilderness anymore. "Perfect," Maya said, adjusting her camera settings. "The more isolated, the better for atmosphere." As we hiked deeper into the forest, I noticed something odd about the trees. Many of them were scarred, as if something had been clawing at the bark. The scratches were too high for animals, too systematic to be natural. They formed patterns that almost looked like writing. "Hey, check this out," I called to the others. Derek examined the marks with his usual skepticism. Probably just teenage vandalism. Kids love to carve stuff into trees. But these weren't typical initials or crude drawings. The scratches were deep, deliberate, and covered entire sections of bark. They reminded me of the tally marks prisoners used to count days, but there were hundreds of them on each tree. The forest grew darker as we climbed higher, the canopy so thick that only scattered beams of sunlight reached the ground. The air became cooler, carrying an odd smell, sweet but somehow wrong, like flowers left too long in water. "Do you hear that?" Maya asked suddenly. We all stopped and listened. Faintly, carried on the still air, came the sound of children laughing. It was distant but unmistakable, the high, clear laughter of kids at play. "Must be another camp group," Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. The laughter came again, closer this time. But there was something unsettling about it. It went on too long, rose too high, and had an edge of hysteria that made my skin crawl. We reached Hollow Creek just as the sun was setting. The creek bed was dry except for a few stagnant pools that reflected the dying light like black mirrors. The camping area was a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, their branches so thick they blocked out most of the sky. As we set up our equipment, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Scattered around the clearing were children's belongings, a small sneaker, a torn comic book, a water bottle with a cartoon character on it. All of them weathered and faded, as if they'd been there for months. "These must be from the missing kids," I said, holding up the sneaker. Maya started filming immediately. "This is incredible. We're at the actual site where they disappeared." But Derek was staring at something else. "Guys," he said quietly, "look at the trees. The scratches we'd seen on the trail were here too, but more extensive. They covered every tree trunk in the clearing, creating a chaotic maze of marks that hurt to look at. And in the center of the clearing, carved deep into the earth, was a large circle filled with symbols I didn't recognize." "What is this place?" Maya whispered. The laughter came again, much closer now. It seemed to come from all directions at once, echoing off the trees until it filled the entire clearing. But there were no children in sight. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete it felt oppressive. Even the wind seemed to have died. We set up our tents as quickly as possible, fighting the growing sense that we were being watched. The feeling was so strong that I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see faces peering out from between the trees. As night fell, we gathered around our small camping stove to eat dinner. The beam of our flashlight seemed pathetically weak against the surrounding darkness, creating a tiny island of light in an ocean of black. "Tell me about the local folklore," Maya said, keeping her camera rolling. "What are people saying about this place?" I pulled out my research notes. There are stories going back decades about children disappearing in these woods. Always the same pattern: kids go missing, searches turn up nothing, and then people start hearing laughter in the forest. "What kind of laughter?" Derek asked. "Happy laughter. Playful laughter. Like the kids are still here, still playing, just somewhere else." As if summoned by my words, the laughter started again. This time it was close enough that I could make out individual voices, a boy's giggle, a girl's squeal of delight, the sound of multiple children having the time of their lives. "That's coming from right outside our camp," Derek said, gripping his sound equipment. Maya panned her camera toward the source of the noise, but the viewfinder showed only darkness. The laughter grew louder, more insistent, as if the children were trying to get our attention. "Come play with us," a voice called out. It was a little girl, maybe 7 years old, her words clear and distinct. "We're having so much fun. Don't go out there," I warned as Derek started to stand. But the voice was so innocent, so genuinely happy, that it was hard to feel threatened. More voices joined in, a chorus of children calling to us from the darkness. "Please come play. We've been waiting so long. We know such good games. You'll love it here. You'll never want to leave." Maya kept filming, her camera's infrared light revealing nothing but empty forest. But the voices were getting closer, and I could swear I heard the sound of small feet running through the underbrush. "This is impossible," Derek muttered. "There's no one out there." A small face appeared at the edge of our light, a boy, maybe 9 years old, with pale skin and dark eyes. He was wearing a camp t-shirt identical to the ones in the missing persons photos. "Hi," he said, smiling brightly. "I'm Tommy. Want to play hide and seek?" Maya's camera focused on him, but something was wrong with the image. The boy flickered in and out of view, as if the camera couldn't quite capture him properly. "You're dead," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Tommy's smile never wavered. "Dead? That's silly. We're just playing. We've been playing for months and months. It's the best game ever." More children appeared around the edges of our camp. All of them pale, all of them wearing the same camp uniforms, all of them smiling with an intensity that was deeply unsettling. "You can't be here," Derek said, backing away from the nearest child. "This isn't real." "Of course we're real," laughed a girl with pigtails. "We're as real can be. And we want you to play with us." "What kind of game?" Maya asked, still filming. "Hide and seek," Tommy said. "But it's special hide and seek. Once you start playing, you can't stop. Ever." The children began to circle our camp, their movements eerily synchronized. They were all smiling, all laughing, but there was something predatory about their behavior. Like wolves pretending to be sheep. "The best part," said another boy, "is that you get to hide forever. No one will ever find you. You'll be safe here with us always." "What happened to you?" I asked. "What really happened that night?" Tommy's smile faltered slightly. "We got lost. So lost. And then we found this place, and the trees told us about the game. They said if we played it right, we'd never have to leave. Never have to go back to the boring old world." "The trees told you?" Maya pressed. "They're alive," whispered the girl with pigtails. "They've been alive for so long, and they get lonely. So they taught us how to stay, how to become part of the game." As she spoke, I noticed something horrifying. The children weren't casting shadows in our flashlight beams. And when they moved, their feet didn't disturb the fallen leaves on the ground. "You're not really here," I said. "You're dead. You died in these woods." "Dead is such an ugly word," Tommy said, his smile returning. "We prefer to say we're playing. And soon, you'll be playing too." The children rushed toward us all at once. I felt small hands grabbing at my clothes, pulling me toward the trees. Their touch was ice cold, and where they grabbed me, my skin began to numb. "Don't fight it," Tommy whispered in my ear. "It's so much better when you don't fight it." Maya screamed as the children swarmed over her, their laughter mixing with her cries. I saw her camera fall to the ground, its light spinning wildly as she was dragged into the darkness. Derek tried to run, but the children were faster. They surrounded him, their small hands reaching up to pull him down. His sound equipment scattered across the clearing as he disappeared into the forest. I was alone now, surrounded by the giggling children. They formed a circle around me, their pale faces glowing in the darkness. "Your turn," Tommy said. "Time to play hide and seek." "I don't want to play," I said desperately. "Everyone wants to play," the girl with pigtails said. "Deep down, everyone wants to stay and play forever." They began to close in, their cold hands reaching for me. I felt myself growing numb, my thoughts becoming sluggish. The children's laughter filled my head, drowning out everything else. "That's it," Tommy encouraged. "Just let go. Let the game begin." I felt myself fading, becoming less solid, less real. The world around me grew dim, and I realized I was becoming like them, trapped in this place, forever playing their endless game. But part of me fought back. With tremendous effort, I managed to grab Maya's fallen camera and hit the record button. "If anyone finds this," I gasped, "don't come to Hollow Creek. The children, they're still here. Still playing. And they want others to join their game." The children's laughter grew louder, more insistent. Tommy's face filled my vision, his smile wider than any human smile should be. "No one will find that," he said. "No one ever comes here anymore. Except for people like you, and they all end up playing with us." The darkness closed in, and I felt myself joining the game. My body became light, insubstantial. The numbness spread through my limbs until I couldn't feel anything at all. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the circle with the other children. Tommy was there, and the girl with pigtails, and dozens of others I hadn't seen before. All of them smiling, all of them happy. "Welcome to the game," Tommy said. "You're going to love it here." And you know what? He was right. The game was wonderful. We played hide and seek in the endless forest, where time had no meaning and nothing ever changed. We laughed and ran and had the most amazing adventures. Sometimes, new players would come to join us. Lost hikers, curious campers, people who'd heard the stories and wanted to investigate. We'd welcome them with open arms, show them how to play our special game. The trees helped us, of course. They whispered to the newcomers, filled their dreams with visions of endless play. And when the time was right, we'd invite them to join us permanently. It was the most wonderful game in the world. And it never, ever ended. Maya's camera was found 3 weeks later by a search team, its memory card intact. The footage showed our final night at Hollow Creek, but the authorities dismissed it as an elaborate hoax. The case was closed, and we were officially listed as missing persons. But we're not missing. We're exactly where we want to be. Playing the greatest game ever invented. Forever and ever and ever. Come play with us. We're waiting.